on to Jackson on our next slide, you see that the veto usage we've already alluded at. Jackson felt that as champion of the people, it was his job to look out for their interests, and veto legislation he saw as taking away from their rights and needs and taking away from the proper role of government in relationship to the people. As such, he vetoed more legislation than all the other presidents before him put together. For this, his opponents saw him as being a tyrannical, despotic, emperor-like figure who simply did things by fiat and kept what he wanted and got rid of what he didn't want. And the Whigs, by 1832, certainly by 1836, the Whigs are a compilation of people who are united mainly by their hatred of Jackson. They're unified by the fact that they see Andrew Jackson as the most dangerous man in the country. However, they are losing these elections in 1828, 1832, and 1836 because of a common theme that you see in politics today all the time. The theme is you play off your political opponent as being an elitist who is out of touch, and you paint yourself and drive the narrative of yourself being the candidate who understands your needs and dreams and desires as a people. Jackson and the Democratic machine successfully did this through 3 straight elections, up to and through the election of Martin Van Buren. With Van Buren's election, though, that will all change. But the final element of Jackson's presidency, when you think Andrew Jackson in review for your exam, you ought to think about the tariff crisis and nullification. You ought to think about 1832 and the bank issue. You ought to think about the veto usage, which we've just talked about. And lastly, Indian removal. Jackson did see himself as a champion of the common man. Now, it depends on your terms. It depends on you're defining your terms. What are you defining common man as? If you're defining common man as white, working class, male, American over 21, then Jackson definitely strongly tried to represent those interests, particularly with Indian removal. He had taken, but the state of Georgia and Mississippi and Alabama were actively working to remove Native American tribes from the last holdings that they had in the Southeast. Native American tribes, the Cherokees, the Choctaws, the Creeks, the Crows, still had significant property holdings in these areas of the map here. And they had done what none of the other tribes had truly done. They tried to adapt white culture and white ways in terms of white customs, white dress. They established their own alphabet. They tried to live as the Anglo-Saxon society lived, thinking that that would keep them safe and that would allow them to integrate. Cherokees even owned slaves in some instances. They had a plantation economy in some instances. They tried to adapt to the model of what the Americans around them were doing. They did not understand, early until it was too late, that this was not good enough, because it wasn't that the white common men of this area wanted them to integrate so they could blend into their culture with the white culture, the white American culture. The common men of this area wanted their land outright for themselves, the white common men. So the state of Georgia began evicting the Cherokees and the Seminoles, the Creeks, the other Native American tribes as well. The Native American tribes tried to use institutional governmental means to appeal this, and they appealed their case all the way to the Supreme Court. And in the case of Worcester versus Georgia, Chief Justice John Marshall sides with the Cherokees. He argues the state of Georgia is violating the law by not protecting the rights of the Cherokees to the land they had signed by treaty with and had property rights and common title to. And John Marshall says, if Georgia will not enforce this law, then the federal government must step in to make this happen. At this point in time, Andrew Jackson does nothing. Nothing. This is a very big deal. It's not very often that you see presidents defy the Supreme Court. The quote that is usually alluded to Jackson, even though there's argument as to whether or not he actually said this, but the quote that is alluded to him over this is, it's claimed that he said, John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. Jackson did not want to see this decision enforced because Jackson, representing the interests of the common man as he saw it, wanted to see those Indians evicted. Jackson had very little use for Native Americans as part of the American political spectrum, and thought the best thing to do with them in that regard was to evict them or make war on them through violent or nonviolent means and simply remove them from the picture. So Jackson ignores the court mandate and allows Georgia, the state of Georgia, the government of Georgia, to continue doing what it's doing, to evict Cherokees from the land, allow white settlers to take the land, take the property, etc. It's a major instance. The exceptions in history are some of the things we look at an awful lot on the AP exam, and there's only about 2 to 3 other instances where you're going to see sitting presidents defy or ignore the rulings or edicts of the Supreme Court. We'll talk about those instances as well. This is linkage. It happens so infrequently that when it does, it's a big deal. And of course, this wins Jackson's votes with the white common men that are the core of his political support, because remember where the core of Jackson's political support comes from. During his time period in office, in the time period when he was running, the political center of gravity of the United States had shifted further west. The political core of his support is these areas in green and these areas in purple here. This is the area from which he's generating most of his votes. And by generating those votes, with these new areas that open up to settlement, being filled by all sorts of white settlers and white working class individuals, small farmers, planters, artisans, mechanics, etc. He's got a great political base there, which lasts to and through both of his 2 terms. As I said, though, as I said earlier, the shoe is going to drop for his successor, Martin Van Buren, who was in many ways the architect of the Democratic Party political machine that guaranteed and assured his success, painting Jackson as the champion of the common man and painting the Democratic Party as the party that saw the interests and needs of the common man above and over the Whigs. Martin Van Buren, he is the one who in many ways is going to pay the dues for Jackson's policies. Jackson did try to issue the specie circular, as we'd mentioned, trying to make federal payments for land as people purchase land in gold only to stop the rush of paper money, funny money that was out there, sort of like monopoly money that was out there being spread by the banks as they had overextended their credit lines. That didn't stop the panic and crash from falling as certain banking houses collapsed and pulled in loans from other people and other banking houses, leading to a downturn in the economy. With the Panic of 1837, Martin Van Buren attempts what was known as the Independent Treasury Plan. He essentially sets up a system by which he's going to have independent sub-treasuries, not really banks, but sub-treasuries that'll hold federal reserves of money instead of giving it to the pet banks anymore, since that didn't work. But the economy has to work through all this extra fake credit that was in the system and all the extra downturn that was in the system from all the surplus loans that were made and all the economic losses that come out of the unemployment that comes and the inability of people to pay debts. And here's where the Whigs finally learn to out-Jackson the Jacksonians. The Whigs learn to finally hit upon the combination that allows them to sell themselves as the party of the common people. It is the Whigs now attacking Van Buren as an elitist, who is out of touch, who's living this life of luxury while the common people are suffering, and the Whigs champion themselves as the party of the common person, saying that Jackson has allowed all this, Jackson through Van Buren, and Van Buren in particular, has allowed all this economic ruin to take place, and you have this log cabins and hard cider campaign as William Henry Harrison, a war veteran, just like Jackson was from 1812, and William Henry Harrison, a common man. They said he was born in a log cabin and he drank hard cider as opposed to drinking champagne and being very elite and effete. So it's a campaign of politics, economics, and class. And the idea is to have your opponent, this is so common today even, have your opponent described as the one who is sitting, a fat cat, rich and comfortable, and doesn't understand your needs, while we as the party that understands your needs. And Whigs successfully, with this ticket, with John Tyler, Tippecanoe and Tyler too, was their rallying cry, along with the log cabin hard cider campaign, get to speak this language, and they seek to be all things to all people, attacking Van Buren as with an utter inability to solve these political problems. He's trying to run on his own record, Van Buren was, which wasn't very good with the economic downturn. And so they were nationalistic, held the parades and rallies that the Democrats had done before them, and it was characterized by not so much a discussion of the issues, but a discussion of the beliefs of the party and the attitudes and prejudices of both parties. And the Whigs finally win their first candidacy in William Henry Harrison. And this in many ways will be the end of an era. It's the end of this Jacksonian era with Harrison's victory, as we're going to move more towards sectional era and sectional crises being key elements along with Manifest Destiny. Harrison, unfortunately, does not serve as president very long. He's president about 3 months before he dies of pneumonia, and John Tyler, who had been a Democrat, put on the ticket to try to woo and get some Democrat votes to cross over, then becomes president. And this outrages the Whigs, and most of Tyler's cabinet, who was Harrison's cabinet, they resign. And so Tyler's sort of a man without a party, and the Whigs are frustrated by the fact they finally got their man in office only to not have their man in office anymore. But as I said, we're going to see a new cycle of crises take place this new era that are going to move beyond issues of the bank, beyond issues of Indian removal, beyond issues of tariff nullification, and more into issues of territorial acquisition and the political and social and racial consequences of those decisions as we move through the 1840s and 1850s. So it's the transference of political priorities that takes place with Harrison's victory that closes out the Jacksonian era, which will lead us into our next lesson.